Hello, and welcome back to our philosophy series. Tonight, we're unraveling the toxic trap of modern Stoicism, a beautiful ancient system of resilience hijacked by tech billionaires and internet echo chambers to justify emotional suppression. Before we step back in time, settle into a comfortable spot, take a deep breath, and if you like, subscribe and leave a comment below, telling me your current local time or where you are in the world. Our story begins in 300 BCE. Picture the ancient Mediterranean, where the air smells of sharp brine and crushed murex sea snails. A wealthy merchant named Zeno of Citium was hauling a fortune in luxurious Tyrian purple dye when a storm shattered his ship. Washed ashore in Athens, he lost everything. Yet from that devastating shipwreck, Zeno founded Stoicism, a philosophy built on virtue and deep harmony with society. Fast forward to the 170s CE. We find Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius in the freezing mud along the Danube River. The air is thick with the metallic tang of war and the stench of plague. Grieving the agonizing loss of his own children, he survives not by turning his emotions off, but by managing his judgments. Ancient Stoicism was never about being a cold rock. It kept your heart open through hell. Chapter 2. The Silicon Valley, Hijack, and the Rise of Stoicism. We shift our timeline away from the ancient empires. We cross centuries of history, leaving behind the dust of Athens and the Roman frontier. We arrive in the late 1990s and early 2000s, landing on the western coast of the United States. Welcome to the dawn of the tech boom. Picture the sprawling campuses of California. The environment here is climate-controlled and sterile. You walk past glass walls, rows of standing desks, and whiteboards covered in complicated algorithms. You hear the hum of server farms cooling themselves. You smell the sharp aroma of artisanal espresso roasting in the break room. The light here is different. It is the cold, blue glow of computer monitors reflecting off the faces of a new generation of empire builders. This is Silicon Valley. It is a place built on the promise of innovation, but it runs on a demanding engine known as hustle culture. To survive in this environment, founders and engineers work 100-hour weeks. They sleep under their desks. They face brutal pressure from venture capitalists who demand endless growth. If a startup fails, the culture dictates that the founder is a failure. The psychological strain is immense. These tech workers need a way to cope with the stress. They need an edge to beat the competition. They do not turn to modern therapy. Instead, they look backward. They dig through history and find a fractured, misunderstood version of ancient Roman and Greek thought. They discover a philosophy originally designed to help people survive slavery, plague, and exile, and they decide to repurpose it to survive board meetings and coding sprints. During the 2000s and 2010s, this ancient system undergoes a bizarre transformation. Prominent figures in the tech world start treating the philosophy like a piece of software. Investor and author Tim Ferriss explicitly calls Stoicism the ideal operating system. Think about that specific phrasing. An operating system is a set of instructions you install into a machine to make it run faster. It has no morals. It has no empathy. It just processes data. By framing the philosophy this way, the tech industry begins the process of stripping away the human element. Other modern evangelists help accelerate this trend. Former public relations executive Ryan Holiday writes a series of books that repackage ancient texts into digestible, daily quotes. His brand grows into an empire with millions of followers, a newsletter and a podcast. He gives talks at Google. He chats with prominent tech founders like Twitter co-creator Jack Dorsey. The ancient ideas spread through the ranks of startups and corporate offices like a virus. But as the teachings spread, they mutate. When you compress a complex worldview into short motivational quotes, you lose the foundational core. The original Hellenistic thinkers, from Zeno to Epictetus, cared about physics, logic, and ethics. They viewed the world as a divinely ordered web of cause and effect. To them, being a Stoic meant recognizing your role in the universal city of humanity. It was a framework of interdependence. You were supposed to care about your neighbors. The Silicon Valley version discards the civic obligation. It discards the ethics. It keeps only the psychological mechanism of emotional suppression. Tech executives ask themselves how they can ignore their critics while they build their empires, rather than asking how they can live a virtuous life. They view their brains as computers, and they use this mutated philosophy as a firewall to block out distractions, guilt, and doubt. To see the real-world danger of this hijack, we must look at a specific, chilling case study. In 2002, a young woman leaves her home in Houston to study chemical engineering at Stanford University. Her parents send her off to college with a specific gift, a copy of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. Her name is Elizabeth Holmes. She later tells interviewers that she read the book repeatedly, finding inspiration in the disciplined mindset of the ancient leader. Holmes drops out of Stanford and founds a blood-testing startup called Theranos. She builds a company based on the premise that a single drop of blood can replace traditional, costly medical tests. She raises hundreds of millions of dollars in venture capital. She reaches a net worth in the billions. She also embraces the aesthetic of the tech visionary, wearing plain black turtlenecks to reduce decision fatigue, a form of modern austerity. But the technology does not work. The company is a facade. Holmes relies on the lessons she learned from her favorite book to maintain her composure while the walls close in. She focuses on the teachings about accepting things outside of her control and maintaining mastery over her emotions. She weaponizes the resilience of an emperor to project confidence while lying to investors, patients, and the medical community. Holmes eventually faces federal charges and goes to prison, but her story illustrates the ultimate trap. She took the armor of the ancients, but she threw away the virtue. She used the philosophy to protect her ego and her wealth, ignoring the harm she caused to everyday people who relied on her blood tests for their health. This twisting of ancient ideals becomes so widespread that modern thinkers realize they need a new vocabulary to describe it. Philosopher and biologist Massimo Pigliucci watches the tech industry adopt these practices and coins a specific term to describe the corruption. He calls it Stoicism, deliberately replacing the first letter with a $sign. Pigliucci defines this term as a misguided practice where people use ancient lessons merely to win money, gain public attention, and secure medals. It is an approach built entirely on self-interest. The modern corporate warrior practices a routine of waking up at dawn, taking an ice-cold shower, fasting, and reading a quote about enduring hardship. But they do these things to increase their profit margins, not to become a better member of society. It is an open-source lifestyle brand. It serves as a philosophical veneer placed over the brutal reality of hustle culture. Let us dive deeper into the psychology of the tech founder. Why do they crave this specific type of armor? Hustle culture demands that you tie your self-worth to your productivity. The environment teaches you that constant busyness is a badge of honor. If you take a break, you fall behind. If you show vulnerability, your competitors will crush you. The fear of failure ticks in the back of your mind every single day. To survive this ecosystem, you have to distance yourself from the human cost of your actions. If your new software disrupts an industry and puts thousands of people out of work, you cannot let that bother you. If your social media algorithm promotes anger and divides communities because it increases engagement, you have to look the other way. You just need to optimize the system. Stoicism gives these leaders a convenient excuse. The core tenet they focus on is the dichotomy of control. The idea that you should only worry about what is in your power and ignore everything else. A tech executive tells himself that he only controls his code and his marketing strategy. He tells himself he does not control society's reaction to his product. Therefore, he convinces himself that he is not responsible for any societal damage. He uses the concept of control to wash his hands of guilt. Ethics philosopher Gwilym David Blunt identifies a hidden, dangerous trap in this mindset. When you declare that you cannot control outside events, you surrender your autonomy to those forces. You stop trying to challenge the abuse of power. You just accept the status quo. Blunt points out that the original philosophy gained popularity during the Roman Empire, a time when many people were subjugated. Rising up against the emperor seemed foolish and lethal, so people focused inward. Today, the tech elite use this dynamic to their advantage. They accumulate vast financial and ideological power. They push for less government regulation so they can innovate faster, and they lobby for lower taxes so they can keep their wealth. Meanwhile, they encourage their workforce and the general public to practice resilience. They sell the idea that you should just accept economic disruption. They suggest you endure the instability of the gig economy without complaining. They take a framework designed to help marginalized people survive tyranny, and they use it from the top down to keep the modern workforce quiet and compliant. We also see tech leaders adopt specific ancient exercises, but they twist the purpose. Take the practice of premeditatio malorum, which translates to the premeditation of evils. The ancients used this exercise to imagine worst-case scenarios, like losing their home or their family. The goal was to realize that they could survive the loss because their true value came from their character, not their possessions. In the boardrooms of California, this exercise mutates into simple risk management. A venture capitalist imagines a product launch failing or a competitor stealing their market share. They run through the scenarios to build business contingencies. They try to safeguard their investments. They miss the spiritual point of the exercise. They are not trying to detach themselves from wealth. They are trying to protect their wealth. Then there is the concept of amor fati, the love of fate. The ancients taught that you should embrace whatever happens to you, viewing every obstacle as an opportunity to practice virtue. Modern hustle culture twists this idea into a weapon against work-life balance. When a project manager demands that a team work through the weekend to meet an impossible deadline, they might frame it as a challenge to be embraced. They use the concept of loving your fate to romanticize exploitation. Employees internalize this boss mentality, using constant busyness as a shield to avoid confronting their authentic selves. This creates a cosmic disconnect. The ancient texts spoke of the cosmopolis, the idea that every human is a single thread in a vast, interconnected tapestry. They believed that what harms the hive also harms the bee. But the modern Stoic views themselves as separate from the hive. They build isolated bunkers. They obsess over biohacking to extend their own lifespans. They try to privatize space travel. They use this hollowed-out ideology to build a wall between themselves and the rest of humanity. It becomes an atheistic enterprise trying to convey a sense of spirituality. It focuses entirely on the self, elevating personal achievement above all else. This isolation breeds a specific kind of modern loneliness. A wealthy founder might have millions of dollars and a successful company, but they cannot genuinely connect with anyone. They have trained themselves to view emotions as bugs in their mental software. They repress their anxiety, their sadness, and their need for companionship. They become trapped in a prison of their own making, guarded by the very philosophy they thought would set them free. The commodification is relentless. You can buy medallions with ancient quotes to carry in your pocket. You can subscribe to daily newsletters that promise to make you more productive. You can attend exclusive retreats where executives pay thousands of dollars to sit in silence and learn how to optimize their workflow. The original intent of Zeno, who lost all his wealth in a shipwreck and decided that character was the only true good, is buried under layers of marketing and profit margins. The boardrooms of California successfully normalized this emotional suppression. They made it profitable. They built a pristine, wealthy facade over a hollow core, convincing an entire generation of workers that the key to success is to stop feeling. But this ideology did not stay contained within the glass walls of corporate offices. It leaked out. It traveled through the very algorithms, social media platforms, and video networks that these tech companies built. It trickled down from the billionaires and found a new, eager audience. This new audience did not have venture capital. They did not have stock options or corner offices, but they did have a vast reservoir of simmering anger, resentment, and isolation. If this hollowed-out armor is dangerous in the hands of a billionaire trying to optimize a supply chain, what kind of weapon does it become when it falls into the laps of alienated, radicalized men lurking in the darkest corners of the internet? Chapter 3. The Descent into the Manosphere. We leave the air-conditioned boardrooms of California and move into a different kind of environment. The year is 2018. The setting is not a centralized location. It is a sprawling, decentralized network of bedrooms, basements, and study halls stretching across the globe. You can smell the stale air trapped inside rooms where the windows remain shut. You hear the rhythmic clacking of mechanical keyboards in the dark. The only illumination is the harsh, white glare of online forums reflecting in the eyes of millions of young men. This is the digital underworld. It is an ecosystem built on isolation. During the late 2010s, a crisis of loneliness takes root among men. They lack communities. They lack purpose. They feel left behind by a changing economy and shifting social dynamics. When they look for guidance, they do not find local mentors. They open their laptops. They search the internet for answers to their pain, their romantic rejections, and their lack of direction. The search algorithms feed their data into complex mathematical loops. The system recognizes their vulnerability and serves them content designed to keep their attention. In 2018, a classical scholar named Donna Zuckerberg publishes a book titled Not All Dead White Men. She holds a doctorate from Princeton University. She spends years studying ancient Greek and Roman texts. She also spends years wading through the darkest corners of the internet. Her research exposes a terrifying cultural trend. She reveals that a network of male supremacy groups has hijacked the ancient philosophies of the Mediterranean. This network is known as the manosphere. The manosphere is not a single organization. It is an umbrella term encompassing various online factions. You have the pickup artists who view romance as a game to manipulate. You have the men going their own way, a separatist group that believes interacting with women is a liability. You have the red pill community, a group connected by deep resentments against women and society. Zuckerberg observes that these disparate groups share a common obsession. They idolize the thinkers of antiquity. They plaster quotes from Seneca, Epictetus, and Marcus Aurelius across their message boards. They create a toxic ideology. Modern observers call this mutation Stoicism. To understand how this happens, we must look at the mechanics of radicalization. A young man goes online looking for fitness advice or tips on how to build confidence. The algorithm shows him a video about self-improvement. The video quotes Marcus Aurelius. The emperor's words sound strong. The young man clicks on another video. This next video uses the same quotes, but the tone shifts. The narrator argues that modern society is weak because it prioritizes emotion. The narrator claims that true men do not feel pain. The algorithm then pushes the young man into deeper, unregulated forums. In these forums, the teachings of the ancients undergo a brutal dissection. The manosphere takes the philosophy of Zeno and slices it into pieces. They discard the ethics. They throw away the foundational concept of justice. They keep only the aesthetic of emotional detachment. They teach their followers that burying all feelings is the ultimate expression of masculinity. This requires a deliberate misreading of history. The leaders of these online groups tell their followers that the Latin root for virtue, vir, means man. They use this linguistic connection to claim that Stoicism is an exclusive doctrine for male dominance. This Latin etymology is real, but it is a deliberate distortion. The Stoics themselves thought, wrote, and taught in Greek, not Latin, and used the gender-neutral word arete. The ancient Greek word for virtue is arete, which means excellence. It has no gender constraint. Furthermore, the Greeks focused on andreia, which translates to courage. The online brokers of this toxic ideology ignore the actual writings of the founders. If we look back at the original lore of the Stoa Poikile, the ancient teachers were surprisingly progressive for their era. Musonius Rufus, a prominent Roman teacher, delivered a lecture arguing that the capacity for virtue is the exact same in men and women. Cleanthes, the direct successor to Zeno, wrote an entire treatise in the 3rd century BCE titled On the Thesis that Virtue is the Same in Man and Woman. The ancients believed that the universal logic guiding the cosmos, the logos, lived inside every human mind. To the original thinkers, rationality was not a gendered trait. It was the spark of the divine shared by all people. The internet brokers erase this history. They build a false narrative. They tell their followers that men are naturally guided by reason, while women are driven by chaotic emotion. They use this manufactured dichotomy to justify misogyny. They tell young men that because they possess the capacity for stoic reason, they deserve to hold power over others. Let us examine how each faction of the digital underworld weaponizes specific ancient texts. We begin with the pickup artists. These men focus on the mechanics of seduction. They face frequent rejection. To protect their egos, they appropriate the teachings of Epictetus. Epictetus was a man born into slavery in Hierapolis. He endured torture. He survived by recognizing that his captors could break his leg, but they could never control his will. His philosophy was a survival mechanism for the oppressed. The seduction coaches take the survival tactics of a slave and use them to manipulate women. Epictetus taught that you must separate things you can control from things you cannot control. He urged his students to detach their self-worth from external outcomes. The online coaches twist this. They instruct their followers to ignore the boundaries of the women they approach. They tell young men to view rejection as a meaningless external event. If a woman says no, the coach tells the man to suppress his embarrassment, rely on his rational armor, and escalate his behavior. They use the ancient virtue of endurance to excuse harassment. They drain the empathy from human interaction. Next, we look at the faction known as men going their own way. This group advocates for total separation from romantic relationships. They view society as a trap designed to steal their resources. They browse their forums, reading the private journals of Marcus Aurelius. The emperor wrote extensively about withdrawing into the inner citadel of the mind to find peace amidst the chaos of war and plague. He used this technique to recharge his spirit so he could return to his duties and serve the Roman people. The separatist groups strip away the duty. They quote the emperor to justify their bitterness. A user on a message board will face a difficult breakup. Instead of processing his grief, he logs online. He reads a manifesto telling him that relationships are a bad investment. He adopts a twisted version of the inner citadel. He builds walls of resentment around his mind. He cuts off contact with the outside world. He convinces himself that his isolation is a noble philosophical choice. He believes he's practicing ancient wisdom. In reality, he's just hiding from vulnerability. Then we have the core red pill community. This is where the ideology becomes most destructive. This group focuses on power, dominance, and a cynical view of human nature. They obsess over the concept of the alpha male. They read the letters of Seneca. Seneca was a statesman and a playwright who understood human emotion deeply. He wrote about managing anger and dealing with grief. He explicitly stated that a person may weep for a lost friend, provided they do not let the wailing consume them. He recognized the necessity of feeling sorrow. The digital overlords of the red pill ignore Seneca's nuance. They promote a rigid, robotic existence. They instruct their followers that any display of sadness, fear, or uncertainty is a fatal flaw. They tell teenage boys that if they show emotion, society will crush them. They mandate the suppression of all feeling. They equate anger with strength. This creates a paradox. The leaders of these forums claim to be masters of their own minds, but they are consumed by grievance. They spend their days posting furious rants about the state of the world. They are outraged by changing demographics. They are terrified of losing their perceived social status. They use the vocabulary of reason to disguise their panic. A true follower of the painted porch accepts the world as it is and works to improve it through justice. The men of the digital underworld refuse to accept reality. They want to turn back the clock. They want a world where they face no competition. As a young man spends more time in this ecosystem, a psychological transformation occurs. He internalizes the rules. He stops sharing his struggles with his friends. If he feels depressed, he tells himself he's just lacking discipline. He wakes up, takes a freezing shower, and reads a quote about enduring pain. He goes to work or school and maintains a blank, unreadable expression. He believes he is building an impenetrable shield. He is told that empathy is a weakness. The ancient doctrine of cosmopolitanism, the idea that every human is a citizen of the universe, bound together by mutual care, is mocked. The online echo chamber teaches him that life is a zero-sum game. If someone else succeeds, it means he loses. He must look out only for himself. He must harden his heart. This hyper-masculine shell begins to suffocate him. Humans are social creatures. Our nervous systems require connection, validation, and emotional exchange to function properly. When a person severs those ties, the brain interprets the isolation as a threat. The young man thinks he is achieving mastery over his environment. He is actually pushing himself into a state of chronic psychological starvation. He cannot form genuine friendships. Friendship requires trust. Trust requires vulnerability. You cannot be vulnerable if you view every interaction as a battle for dominance. He cannot maintain a romantic relationship. Romance requires empathy and mutual respect. You cannot respect a partner if your ideology teaches you that they are irrational and inferior. He becomes an island. The irony is striking. The men who flock to these forums do so because they are lonely. They want to find a tribe. They want to learn how to navigate a confusing world. They are handed a map that leads them directly into a deeper, darker cave. The Stoicism they practice ensures they remain alienated. It cures their insecurity by killing their capacity to care. We can see the physical toll this takes on the body. You can picture the tension in the jaw. You can see the stiffness in the shoulders. The young man is always on guard. He must police his own thoughts to ensure no stray emotion breaches his defenses. If he feels a surge of grief, he must squash it. If he feels a pang of loneliness, he must convert it into anger. Anger is the only emotion permitted in the manosphere. Anger feels like action. Anger feels like power. But anger is corrosive. When you use rage as a substitute for every other human feeling, it alters your perception of reality. You begin to see enemies everywhere. The young man starts to view his co-workers as threats. He views women as adversaries. He views other men as competitors who must be dominated. The world becomes a terrifying, hostile place. His mind, which Epictetus said should be a sanctuary, becomes a war zone. The online platforms benefit from this misery. The algorithms thrive on engagement, and nothing drives engagement like outrage and despair. The content creators within the manosphere build lucrative careers by keeping their audience trapped in a cycle of grievance and suppression. They sell courses on how to be an alpha male. They sell supplements to boost testosterone. They sell books filled with cherry-picked quotes from dead emperors. They monetize the alienation of an entire generation. Donna Zuckerberg's research highlights the danger of this intersection between ancient text and modern technology. When you take a philosophy designed to promote virtue and feed it into a digital machine designed to maximize outrage, the result is poisonous. The texts are stripped of their context. The words of a slave and the journals of an emperor are flattened into memes. They become empty slogans used to justify cruelty. The young men trapped in this cycle believe they are honoring the legacy of Rome and Greece. They believe they are the last defenders of Western civilization. They type out manifestos about rationality and logic, yet their actions betray the core tenets of the philosophy they claim to love. They lack the courage to face their own insecurities. They lack the justice to treat others with respect. They lack the wisdom to see that they are being manipulated by online grifters. They build an identity around the denial of their own humanity. They swallow their pain. They force it down into the dark corners of their minds. They throw away the key. They present a face of stone to the outside world. They convince themselves that they are bulletproof, but the human brain is not a machine. You cannot delete a trauma file. You cannot uninstall an emotion. The nervous system registers every rejection, every failure, and every moment of profound isolation. The body absorbs the stress of maintaining a false facade. The tension builds. These digital echo chambers successfully convinced a generation that burying their feelings made them strong. They promised a life of dominance and calm, but the internal machinery of the mind does not run on code. It runs on biology. When you seal a vessel and apply relentless heat, the pressure has nowhere to go. When you swallow your pain and refuse to let it out, what kind of psychological monster starts growing inside your own mind? Chapter 4. The Internal Pressure Cooker, the Psychology of Toxic Suppression. We shift our focus from the decentralized digital underworld and step into the quiet, controlled environment of the 2020s clinical landscape. We enter the therapist's office. The atmosphere here is intentionally calm. You hear the soft, rhythmic ticking of a wall clock. You feel the woven texture of a fabric sofa beneath you. The lighting is warm and indirect, designed to soothe a frayed nervous system. In this space, the abstract weight of unspoken trauma sits in the center of the room. We are no longer looking at how society twists ancient ideas for profit or online dominance. We are looking at the invisible, biological architecture of the human body. We are examining what happens when a person attempts to turn off their own humanity. During this era, mental health professionals recognize a growing crisis. In 2018, the American Psychological Association, the leading scientific and professional organization representing psychology in the United States, releases a comprehensive document. They publish the Guidelines for Psychological Practice with Boys and Men. This document is the result of decades of research, clinical observation, and data analysis. The guidelines issue a stark warning about a cultural framework they call traditional masculinity ideology. The researchers define this ideology as a specific set of cultural standards that men are pressured to follow. These standards include anti-femininity, the pursuit of achievement and status, the avoidance of any appearance of weakness, and the expectation of emotional suppression. The American Psychological Association specifically points out that socializing boys to restrict their emotions and rely only on extreme self-reliance is harmful. The report links these behaviors to disproportionately high rates of suicide, substance abuse, and cardiovascular disease among men. When this report goes public, it triggers a predictable cultural backlash. Various online commentators and traditionalists argue that the psychological community is attacking the very nature of manhood. They claim that the scientists are trying to pathologize strength, but the clinicians are not attacking resilience. They are attacking a toxic misinterpretation of it. They are warning the public about the severe dangers of emotional suppression. They are sounding the alarm about the exact mutated philosophy we have been tracking. To understand the sheer irony of this situation, we must look at the foundation of modern psychotherapy. The great tragedy of the modern Stoic trap is that genuine ancient Stoicism actually laid the exact groundwork for the most effective psychological treatment we have today. In the mid-20th century, two brilliant psychologists, Albert Ellis and Aaron T. Beck, revolutionized the field of mental health. Before their work, the dominant model is psychoanalysis, which often involves spending years lying on a couch, digging through childhood memories, and analyzing dreams to find the unconscious roots of neurosis. Ellis and Beck find this approach inefficient. They want a practical, present-focused method to help people alleviate their suffering. Albert Ellis develops rational emotive behavior therapy. Aaron T. Beck develops cognitive behavioral therapy. Both of these men openly credit the ancient thinkers of the Mediterranean as their primary inspiration. Ellis explicitly points to a single quote from Epictetus, the philosopher who survived slavery. In his handbook, The Enchiridion, Epictetus writes, "Men are disturbed not by things, but by the views which they take of them." This single sentence is the bedrock of cognitive behavioral therapy. The psychological model teaches that an external event does not directly cause an emotional reaction. Instead, there is a middle step. The external event triggers a belief or a judgment in the mind, and that specific judgment generates the emotion. If you lose your job, the job loss itself does not cause depression. The belief that losing the job means you are a worthless failure is what causes the depression. The ancient teachers understood this mechanism perfectly. They taught their students to intercept their initial impressions. When a practitioner of the painted porch felt a surge of anger or fear, they did not ignore it. They examined it. They placed the emotion under the microscope of reason. They asked themselves if their judgment about the situation was accurate. They processed the feeling through logic, dismantled the false belief, and then allowed the negative emotion to naturally dissipate. They kept their minds flexible. They engaged with their internal world. Toxic Stoicism does the exact opposite. The internet factions and the hustle culture advocates do not practice cognitive reframing. They practice brute force suppression. When a follower of this mutated ideology experiences a painful event, they skip the crucial middle step. They feel the surge of sadness or anxiety. Instead of examining the judgment that caused the feeling, they build a wall over the feeling itself. They swallow the pain. They tell themselves that feeling anything is a sign of weakness. They force their facial muscles to remain still. They distract themselves with work, or they channel the uncomfortable feeling into a rigid, unyielding anger. Clinicians have a specific term for the inability to identify and express emotions. It is called alexithymia. While some people are born with this trait due to neurological differences, many others acquire it through years of cultural conditioning. The modern trap trains young men to develop acquired alexithymia. They practice ignoring their internal signals for so long that they eventually lose the vocabulary needed to describe their own mental states. If a therapist asks them how they feel, they can only offer physical descriptions. They say they feel tired, or they say their stomach hurts. The bridge between their conscious mind and their emotional center is destroyed. But destroying the bridge does not destroy the traffic. The emotions do not vanish simply because the conscious mind refuses to acknowledge them. They are biological events. They are chemical and electrical signals moving through the nervous system. When you attempt to bury a biological event, you turn the human body into an internal pressure cooker. Let us zoom into the physiological reality of this suppression. We must track the specific journey of an unexpressed emotion through the human anatomy. Imagine a young man who has spent years consuming the toxic ideology of the digital underworld. He receives devastating news. Perhaps a close family member passes away, or a significant relationship ends. His brain detects this profound loss. The sensory information travels to the amygdala, a small almond-shaped cluster of nuclei located deep within the temporal lobe. The amygdala is the threat detection center of the brain. It recognizes the emotional pain and immediately sounds an alarm. In a healthy person, the next step involves the prefrontal cortex, the area of the brain responsible for complex thinking and emotional regulation. The prefrontal cortex would contextualize the loss, allow the person to cry, and begin the slow process of grieving. The person would seek comfort from friends. The social connection would release oxytocin, a hormone that soothes the nervous system and lowers stress. Our subject, however, is trained in toxic suppression. His prefrontal cortex sends a different command. It orders the mind to shut down the emotional display. He refuses to cry. He refuses to speak about the loss. He forces his breathing to remain shallow and steady. He returns to his computer and resumes his work, projecting an aura of unbreakable calm. He believes he has won a victory over his biology. He is wrong, because the emotion was not processed. The amygdala never receives the signal that the threat has passed. The alarm bell keeps ringing. The brain interprets this unresolved tension as an ongoing physical danger. It triggers the sympathetic nervous system, initiating a state known as fight or flight. The physiological cascade begins. The hypothalamus sends a signal to the pituitary gland, which in turn sends a signal down to the adrenal glands located just above the kidneys. This pathway is known as the HPA axis. The adrenal glands dump a surge of adrenaline and cortisol into the bloodstream. Cortisol is a vital hormone. In short bursts, it helps a person survive a crisis by increasing glucose in the bloodstream and enhancing the brain's use of that fuel. It shuts down functions that are non-essential in a life or death situation, such as the digestive and reproductive systems. If you are running from a predator, cortisol saves your life. But the young man in our scenario is not running from a predator. He is sitting still in a quiet room, refusing to feel his grief. His body is flooded with stress hormones, but there is no physical outlet for the energy. Because he continues to suppress the emotion day after day, his brain remains locked in this defensive posture. The cortisol continues to flow. Chronic exposure to elevated cortisol levels is devastating to the human organism. The medical data on this is unequivocal. Over time, the continuous presence of these stress hormones corrodes the cardiovascular system. Blood pressure remains artificially high, damaging the delicate inner lining of the arteries. This forces the heart to work harder, increasing the risk of hypertension and heart disease. The immune system also suffers. Cortisol naturally suppresses inflammation to redirect energy toward immediate survival. When the suppression becomes chronic, the immune system becomes dysregulated. The body loses its ability to fight off infections. It becomes susceptible to autoimmune disorders. The internal pressure cooker begins to melt its own wiring. This is the somatic reality of the modern trap. The word somatic comes from the Greek word soma, meaning body. When the conscious mind refuses to process psychological pain, the body absorbs the impact. The unexpressed grief manifests as chronic migraines. The swallowed anxiety translates into severe gastrointestinal distress, such as ulcers or irritable bowel syndrome. The hidden loneliness becomes unexplainable muscle and joint pain. The person visits various doctors looking for a physical cure to these ailments, never realizing that the root cause is the philosophical armor they refuse to take off. The psychological consequences are equally severe. The attempt to control the mind through sheer force triggers a phenomenon known in cognitive science as the ironic process theory. In the late 1980s, a social psychologist named Daniel Wegner conducts a famous experiment. He places subjects in a room and gives them a simple instruction. Do not think about a white bear. He then asks them to speak their thoughts aloud and ring a bell every time a white bear enters their mind. Predictably, the subjects ring the bell frequently. The act of trying to suppress a thought guarantees that the thought will dominate the person's attention. Wegner calls this the white bear problem. The human brain relies on two processes to suppress a thought. First, an intentional operating process searches for distractions to keep the unwanted thought away. Second, an ironic monitoring process operates in the background, checking to make sure the unwanted thought is not returning. This monitoring process requires the brain to continuously reference the very thing it is trying to forget. When the person becomes tired or stressed, the intentional distraction fails, and the background monitor brings the suppressed thought rushing to the front of the conscious mind. Apply this scientific reality to the follower of Stoicism. He spends his days actively trying not to feel his insecurity. He tries not to think about his loneliness. He uses his job, his workout routines, and his internet forums as distractions. But his internal monitor is always checking for signs of weakness. He is trapped in a paradoxical loop. The more he tries to force the emotion down, the more prominent it becomes in his subconscious architecture. This sustained mental gymnastics requires immense cognitive effort. It depletes his mental energy. He suffers from decision fatigue. His memory degrades. His ability to focus on complex tasks diminishes because a large portion of his brain is dedicated to keeping the vault door shut on his own feelings. Eventually, the pressure exceeds the structural integrity of the container. The suppression leads to a breaking point. When the break happens, it rarely looks like a quiet surrender. The accumulated tension seeks an explosive release. The clinical data shows that men who score high on scales of traditional masculinity ideology and emotional suppression are far more likely to experience outbursts of sudden, unprovoked rage. Because anger is the only emotion permitted in their subculture, every other suppressed feeling, sadness, fear, guilt, shame, is transmuted into hostility. A minor inconvenience, such as a delayed train or a spilled cup of coffee, becomes the catalyst for a terrifying, disproportionate reaction. The amygdala, enlarged and hypersensitive from years of chronic stress, hijacks the brain. The person yells at a stranger, they punch a wall, they destroy relationships in a matter of seconds. Afterward, they cannot explain why they reacted with such ferocity. They view themselves as rational beings. They cannot comprehend that their emotional dam has broken. For others, the break manifests as crippling panic attacks. A panic attack is a sudden episode of intense fear that triggers severe physical reactions when there is no real danger or apparent cause. The heart pounds, the chest tightens, the person struggles to breathe and often believes they are experiencing a heart attack. This is the sympathetic nervous system finally overriding the prefrontal cortex, demanding that the person acknowledge the terror they have ignored for years. If the pressure does not explode outward as rage or upward as panic, it implodes inward. This implosion is the mechanics of severe depression. When a person spends a decade telling themselves that their feelings do not matter, they eventually strip the meaning from their own life. They experience anhedonia, the inability to feel pleasure. The world becomes grey and tasteless. They lose interest in their hobbies. They isolate themselves even further from their remaining friends and family. The emotional numbing they practice to avoid pain successfully numbs their capacity for joy. They become a ghost, haunting their own life, observing the world from behind an impenetrable sheet of glass. We reach the most profound contradiction of the entire ideology. The followers of this modern trap believe they are safeguarding their rationality. They idolize logic. They mock people who are driven by emotion, yet the biological reality of their chosen method actually destroys their ability to reason. Let us look at the brain structure again. Neuroscientists using magnetic resonance imaging have studied the brains of individuals subjected to chronic stress and emotional suppression. The images reveal structural changes over time. The persistent flood of cortisol causes the neural networks in the prefrontal cortex to literally shrink. The dendritic spines, the tiny branches that connect neurons and allow for complex thought, wither away. Simultaneously, the neural pathways in the amygdala become thicker and more robust. The brain physically rewires itself to favor emotional reactivity over logical analysis. The follower of Stoicism, who tries to turn himself into a machine, actually damages the biological hardware required to think clearly. He becomes less rational. He becomes more susceptible to manipulation, fear-mongering, and the toxic rhetoric of the online forums we explored earlier. The very goal of the philosophy, the cultivation of reason and virtue, is annihilated by the method used to achieve it. The damage does not stay contained within the individual. The internal pressure cooker creates a societal ripple effect. Consider the family unit. When a father practices toxic suppression, he creates an environment devoid of emotional warmth. Children learn how to navigate the world by watching their parents. If a boy sees his father burying every sorrow and reacting to stress with stone-faced silence or sudden anger, the boy internalizes the same rulebook. He learns that vulnerability is dangerous. The generational trauma is passed down seamlessly without a single word being spoken. The daughter learns that male figures are inherently distant and volatile, skewing her future expectations of relationships. Consider the workplace. When a manager operating under the Silicon Valley hijack suppresses his own empathy, he demands the same from his team. He views employee burnout as a sign of weakness. He creates a corporate culture built on fear and intimidation. The environment becomes toxic, leading to high turnover, low morale, and diminished creativity. The philosophy of endurance is weaponized to maximize efficiency at the cost of human well-being. Consider the broader community. A society filled with individuals who cannot process their own pain is a society incapable of collective empathy. If you cannot feel your own grief, you cannot recognize the suffering of your neighbor. The ancient concept of the cosmopolis, the universal city where everyone works together for the common good, becomes impossible to build. The social fabric tears. Politics becomes a game of domination rather than a process of compromise. The public square fills with individuals shouting past each other, each one trapped behind their own defensive walls, terrified of being seen as vulnerable. The tragedy is layered. The ancient teachers walking the painted porch thousands of years ago designed a system to help humans survive the harshest realities of life. They wanted their students to be brave, yes, but they also wanted them to be kind. They understood that you must keep your heart open to the world, even when the world is cruel. They laid the groundwork for modern therapies that have saved countless lives from the grip of depression and anxiety. Yet this brilliant, healing legacy was stolen. It was stripped of its ethics by boardrooms seeking profit. It was weaponized by digital charlatans seeking followers. It was transformed into a biological trap that spikes cortisol, shrinks the rational brain, and isolates the individual in a prison of their own making. The system we have tracked from the ancient Mediterranean to the modern therapist's office appears broken. We have seen how the billionaires commodified it. We have seen how the internet factions weaponized it to spread hatred. We have seen how the human body physically breaks down under the weight of toxic suppression. When a philosophy meant to connect humanity causes this much mass disconnection, we must ask a critical question. Is the legacy of Zeno, Seneca, Epictetus, and Marcus Aurelius ruined forever? Have the modern distortions permanently tainted the well of ancient wisdom? Or is there a way to dig through the ashes of this toxic trap and find the true healing fire left behind by the ancients? Chapter 5. Reclaiming the Fire, Sympathia and True Resilience. We leave the quiet tension of the modern clinics. We step outside into a new environment. It is dawn. The air holds the chill of overnight dew, clinging to the blades of grass. The horizon transitions from pale indigo to burnt orange, then bright gold. You feel the slow, deliberate expansion of your lungs as you take a breath in. The scent of wet soil and crushed pine needles replaces the stagnant, filtered air of the digital forums. You look up at the fading stars and realize your tiny place in the vast expanse of the cosmos. This does not bring a feeling of insignificance. It brings a feeling of profound belonging. You stand on a spinning rock, anchored by gravity, breathing the exact same oxygen that sustained the ancient thinkers thousands of years ago. To reclaim the stolen fire of this philosophy, we must return to the foundational physics of the ancient world. The tech founders and the internet grifters ignored the physics. They only wanted the psychological shortcuts. They viewed the teachings as an operating system to install. But to the early teachers of the Mediterranean, human ethics meant nothing without a deep understanding of the universe itself. In the 3rd century BCE, a man named Chrysippus takes over the leadership of the Stoic school. He is a brilliant logician, but he also spends his life observing the natural world. He studies the way fire consumes wood, the way water shapes stone, and the way the human body repairs a wound. He reaches a sweeping conclusion. The universe is not a dead, empty void. It is a single, living, breathing organism. Chrysippus and his peers build their entire worldview around a concept called pneuma. They define pneuma as a divine mixture of fire and air. They believe this breath permeates all matter in existence. It gives structure to a solid rock. It gives growth to a towering tree. It gives conscious thought to a human being. Because this exact same breath flows through every single object. Every piece of the cosmos connects to every other piece. This brings us to the most vital, forgotten doctrine of the original school. They call it sympathia. The word translates to mutual suffering or shared feeling. It is the invisible web holding reality together. Picture a spider web covered in morning dew. If a fly lands on the outermost thread, the vibration travels down the silk and alerts the spider resting at the center. The ancient teachers view humanity the exact same way. Because we all share a spark of the universal reason, we are all tied to the same web. If a person suffers on the other side of the world, that suffering ripples through the threads. If a tech executive builds a digital algorithm that isolates teenagers, that isolation damages the executive too, because he poisons the very web he lives on. The modern trap relies on pretending this web does not exist. The corporate warrior builds a fortress of emotional suppression. The internet forum user builds a bunker of rage. They think they can cut their specific thread and float free from the consequences. The physics of Chrysippus declare this impossible. You cannot sever your connection to humanity without severing your connection to reality. A few centuries after Chrysippus, another teacher named Heracles formalizes this idea into a psychological practice. Heracles lives in the 2nd century CE. He observes how human beings mature from infancy. He notes that a newborn baby first recognizes its own body. It wants food, it wants warmth. As the child grows, it recognizes its parents and caregivers. It extends its concern to them. Heracles calls this process oikeiosis, which translates roughly to appropriation, or making something your own. He creates a visual map to guide his adult students. He tells them to imagine their social life as a series of concentric circles. The innermost circle contains your own mind and body. The next ring out holds your parents, your siblings, and your spouses. The 3rd ring holds your extended family. The 4th ring holds your neighbors and co-workers. The 5th ring contains the citizens of your city, followed by the citizens of your country. The final, widest outer ring encompasses the entire human race. Heracles identifies a tragic flaw in human nature. Most people spend their entire lives trapped inside the first 2 circles. They care only for themselves and their immediate bloodline. They view strangers in the outer rings as resources to exploit or enemies to defeat. The modern practitioner of hustle culture operates this way. He uses strangers as stepping stones for wealth. True philosophical training requires the exact opposite behavior. Heracles commands his students to draw the outer circles inward. He tells them to treat a distant cousin like a brother. He tells them to treat a neighbor like a cousin. He tells them to view a nameless stranger across the globe with the same fierce protective instinct they feel for their own child. This is the genuine practice of cosmopolitanism. You are a citizen of the cosmos first. This requires deep vulnerability. When you draw the circles inward, you invite the pain of the world into your heart. You stop building walls. You open the gates. But how do you endure this exposure? If you care about everyone, will the grief not crush your spirit? The modern trap tells you that caring is a liability. The internet factions tell you that empathy makes you weak. They claim the ancient texts preach emotional eradication. They base this destructive lie on a single, misunderstood Greek word, apatheia. In modern language, this word evolved into apathy, meaning a deadened lack of interest or feeling, but the ancient Greek definition was different. To the founders of the painted porch, apatheia meant freedom from pathé. Pathé were defined as irrational, unhealthy, and extreme passions that cloud human judgment. The ancients identified 4 destructive passions: appetite, fear, pleasure, and distress. These were not normal daily feelings, they were runaway obsessions. Appetite was an obsession with future wealth or status. Fear was a paralyzing terror of future pain. Pleasure was an addictive indulgence in present luxuries. Distress was an agonizing, unyielding despair over present difficulties. The goal was to eliminate these 4 extremes because they destroyed your ability to reason. The internet grifters stop reading the texts right there. They tell their followers to become stone statues. They ignore the second half of the doctrine. The original teachers stated in clear terms that a healthy mind still experiences deep emotion. They called these healthy emotions the eupatheiai, which translates to the good feelings. When a practitioner clears away the toxic obsessions, they make room for these positive, rational, effective states. The ancient catalogue of good feelings contains 3 specific categories. Let us examine them to shatter the myth of the emotionless robot. The first good feeling is kara, which translates to joy. The modern tech executive denies himself joy to maintain his competitive edge. He forces a grim, unreadable face. But the ancient sage practices joy daily. This joy does not come from winning a promotion or buying a sports car. It comes from observing a virtuous act. It comes from the quiet satisfaction of doing the right thing. The texts detail subcategories of this joy, including cheerfulness and sociability. A true practitioner smiles. They enjoy the company of their neighbors. The second good feeling is eulabeia, which translates to watchfulness or caution. This replaces paralyzing fear. Instead of viewing the world as a terrifying, lethal threat, the practitioner remains alert and mindful. They recognize dangers without letting the danger hijack their nervous system. They protect their moral character with quiet vigilance. The third good feeling destroys the entire foundation of the manosphere. It is called boulesis, which translates to wishing or goodwill. This is the rational desire for things to go well for others. The subcategories of goodwill include kindness, generosity, warmth, and affection. The original teachers mandate that a good person must cultivate affection for the people around them. Listen to those words again. Joy, sociability, kindness, generosity, warmth, affection. These are the biological requirements of a healthy nervous system. They are the exact traits the modern internet factions try to purge from young men. The men trapped in the digital underworld believe they are practicing ancient wisdom when they shut down their hearts. In reality, they are violating the core physics and ethics of the philosophy they claim to love. They lack goodwill. They lack warmth. Therefore, they are not true practitioners. They are just sad, isolated individuals wearing a stolen uniform. So, how does a modern person break free from this trap? How do we unlearn the toxic conditioning of the present day and reclaim the fire? The process begins with somatic unclenching. You have to lower the armor in physical form. Imagine a person who has held their muscles tight for a decade, bracing for a blow that never arrives. The jaw aches, the shoulders burn, the chest feels tight. The first step toward true resilience is the physical release of that stored tension. You stop viewing your emotions as bugs in a software program. You recognize them as vital biological signals. When you feel a surge of grief, you do not swallow it down. You sit in a quiet room. You let the grief wash over your body. You feel the heat rise in your face. You feel the sting in your eyes. You allow the tears to fall. You realize that crying does not break your rational mind. Crying resets your nervous system so your rational mind can function properly again. We must look at the writings of Seneca. Seneca was a wealthy Roman statesman, yet he understood the depths of human sorrow. When his close friend Lucilius lost a loved one, Seneca wrote a letter. He did not tell his friend to suppress the tears. He wrote that it is natural to weep, provided the weeping does not turn into an endless, self-pitying performance. Seneca recognized that tears are a biological necessity. They are the body's way of washing away the immediate shock of loss. Seneca instructed his friend to let the tears flow, and then to focus on the gratitude of having known the person who died. The gratitude is the rational anchor, keeping the ship from drifting into the storm of despair. The modern internet factions erase this nuance. They see weeping as a failure. Seneca saw weeping as the price of love. If you refuse to pay the price of love, you bankrupt your own soul. This unclenching requires a specific type of courage. The online grifter talks about courage as the willingness to lift heavy weights or dominate a physical opponent. That is a superficial definition. True courage is the willingness to look at your own terrifying insecurities without flinching. It is the bravery to admit you are lonely. It is the strength to tell a friend you are struggling. When you share your pain, you activate the web of sympathia. You send a vibration down the thread. Your friend receives the signal. They respond with empathy. Their response lowers your cortisol levels. Your amygdala stops firing its alarm bell. The internal pressure cooker vents its steam. You return to a state of calm equilibrium. Once you clear the backlog of suppressed trauma, you can begin the real work of philosophical training. You integrate the four cardinal virtues into your daily life: wisdom, courage, temperance, and justice. Wisdom allows you to separate the things you can control from the things you cannot. But you do not use this as an excuse to ignore the world, like the tech billionaire does. You use wisdom to figure out where your actions will have the most positive impact on society. Courage allows you to face the chaos of life. You endure setbacks and illness without losing your moral center. You maintain your integrity when everyone around you compromises theirs for an easy profit. Temperance allows you to moderate your desires. You recognize that endless wealth and digital followers will never satisfy your soul. You find peace in having enough. You stop treating your life like a competitive scoreboard, but the final virtue binds the entire system together. Without justice, the other three virtues become weapons. The ancient teachers believed that justice was the highest social good. Justice means treating every human being with fairness and respect. It means advocating for the vulnerable. It means pushing back against tyranny and exploitation. You cannot practice justice if you remain locked inside the first circle of Heracles. You must look at the outer rings. You look at the homeless person resting on the street corner. You look at the marginalized community facing discrimination. You recognize their suffering is your suffering. You use your wisdom, your courage, and your temperance to lift them up. This shatters the hyper-individualistic trap. Modern society wants you to believe success is a solo journey. The algorithms want to divide you into isolated consumer profiles. The hustle culture wants you to view your peers as competitors. They build a world of fragmented islands. Reclaiming the true philosophy means building bridges between those islands. You stop trying to be an emotionless rock. You become a stable pillar others can lean on. You cultivate the good feelings. You practice joy when your neighbor succeeds. You practice watchfulness to protect your community from harm. You practice goodwill by assuming the best intentions of the people you meet. Picture the dawn again. The sun rises higher, burning away the last of the morning mist. The light touches everything equally. It warms the trees, the soil, and your skin. The light does not discriminate. It does not hoard its energy for itself. True resilience operates the same way. It is a radiating energy. You endure the storms of life so you can shelter others. You manage your judgments so you have the clarity to offer good advice. You feel your own pain deeply, which expands your capacity to understand the pain of the world. You weave yourself back into the tapestry of humanity. Consider the historical figure of Epictetus one more time. We discussed how his teachings were hijacked by men seeking dominance over women. Let us reclaim his actual life. Epictetus endured the horrors of slavery. According to a widely repeated ancient account, his leg was broken by a cruel master, leaving him with a permanent limp, though some ancient sources instead attribute his disability to illness. Yet when he secured his freedom and opened his own school, he did not teach vengeance. He did not teach emotional deadness. He taught his students they were actors in a grand play. The author of the play hands out the roles. Some people are cast as kings, some are cast as beggars, some are cast as healthy individuals, some are cast as cripples. Epictetus taught that your job is not to complain about your role, nor to suppress the natural fear of a difficult part. Your job is to play the given role with excellence. Excellence requires full engagement. If you are cast as a father, you must love your children. If you are cast as a citizen, you must participate in your community. You cannot play your role from behind a wall of apathy. You must step onto the stage. The script requires you to weep when the tragedy strikes and laugh when the comedy unfolds. You just maintain the inner knowledge that the events are temporary, while your character remains eternal. This reframing shifts the entire goal of the practice. You no longer seek to numb yourself, you seek to elevate yourself. You train your mind to distinguish between a minor inconvenience and a true moral failure. A flat tire on your car is a minor inconvenience. A betrayal of a friend is a true moral failure. The modern trap confuses these categories. The toxic practitioner views the flat tire as an excuse to perform a rigid, fake display of toughness. He suppresses his annoyance to prove his superiority over others. But when he betrays a friend to advance his career, he feels no guilt. He uses his corrupted philosophy to excuse his selfish ambition. The true practitioner feels the annoyance of the flat tire, acknowledges the frustration, and changes the tire without making a grand spectacle. But if they ever betray a friend, they feel the crushing weight of that moral failure. They allow the guilt to burn them. They use the pain of that guilt as a catalyst to apologize, make amends, and correct their behavior. The emotion serves a rational, ethical purpose. The nervous system needs this alignment. When your actions match your values, the internal pressure cooker dismantles itself. The cortisol stops flowing. The amygdala rests. The prefrontal cortex expands. The brain heals from the years of chronic stress in physical form. This healing process ripples outward, honoring the physics of Chrysippus. When you heal your own mind, you stop projecting your unexamined trauma onto others. You stop yelling at strangers. You stop creating toxic work environments. You break the cycle of generational damage. You become a node of stability in a chaotic network. Your stability gives others the permission to drop their own armor. When a child sees their parent handle grief with honest tears and steady resolve, the child learns how to process their own sorrow. When an employee sees their manager admit a mistake and take responsibility without raging, the employee learns how to act with integrity. This is the ultimate goal of the Stoa Poikile. Zeno did not build a philosophy for hermits living in caves. He taught on a public porch in the middle of a bustling Athenian market. The noise of merchants, politicians, and travelers surrounded him. He placed his school in the center of human activity because the philosophy belongs in the center of human life. The fire of the ancients still burns. It survived the collapse of the Roman Empire. It survived the Dark Ages. It will survive the sterile boardrooms of California and the dark forums of the internet. The fire is the universal spark of reason, empathy, and courage living inside every human chest. You only need to fan the flames. You blow away the ash of toxic masculinity and the debris of hustle culture. You tend to the coals of joy, watchfulness, and goodwill. You practice the discipline of expanding your circles of concern until your compassion matches the scale of the cosmos. You reclaim your humanity. The toxic trap promised strength through isolation. It delivered sickness and despair. The ancient fire promises strength through connection. It is a much harder path to walk. It requires you to drop the shield and expose your heart to the chaotic, unpredictable nature of human existence. It demands you care. But when you choose to care, you tap into the boundless power of the living cosmos. You align yourself with the breath that shaped the stars. You find your place in the universal city.